Alright everyone, well, let's continue this Halloween Horror Fest marathon with a top 10 list. And this time it's going to be on horror film sequels. Yes, making a horror film sequel is never an easy task for Hollywood. I mean, most of the time they are usually inferior, they usually recycle the same material, or do anything to downplay themselves to a new low. But occasionally, they can actually pull the magic hat trick and it can be done. And that's what I'm here to talk about. So, let's get to it. The top 10 best horror film sequels of all time. At least in my opinion. Starting with number 10. Halloween 2018, I guess you can call it, since it shares the same exact title with the original that it's a sequel to, and yes, believe it or not, this is a sequel. I already included it as one of my top 10 best movies of 2018, and yeah, I thought it's a great continuation, ignoring all the other sequels that came after it originally. Same thing with how they did with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just calling it Texas Chainsaw, but let's not even compare it to that one. Yeah, we're talking Halloween. Jamie Lee Curtis comes back, this time as her grandmother, just as badass, keeping an eye on Michael Myers because she knows that shit's gonna go downhill as soon as they bus him stupidly from one mental institution to another, and, well, he escapes and goes on his killing spree like old times. It's basically like welcoming back an old friend. Even though, of course, he's not a friend to her, he's a killer and targets her. And all the other babysitters, you get a lot of cool kills. Of course, Jamie Lee Curtis's character has a family, and don't think much of the killing at first, but then they realize that the only safe place to be is in her house, which I have to admit is pretty damn cool with the designs and the security and everything like that. Nothing brings family together than wanting to kill Michael Myers, the one who targeted your own grandmother from day one. I mean, nothing beats that. There's plenty of great kills, plenty of great suspense. The climax is fantastic. I mean, it kept me invested and entertained throughout the whole film all the way. And yes, obviously there is a sequel soon to be released this month, so I ain't got much to say there. I'm definitely psyched to see it, even though of course it got delayed from 2020 due to COVID. But otherwise, yeah, this is a great sequel. Ignore all the other ones. If you like them, especially Halloween H2O that came 20 years later, which I thought that one was good too, but I think this one is even better in my opinion. So, just my opinion there, people. Great sequel, great continuation. The old school logos that come up just at the beginning of the film definitely is a reminder like that time never passed. That's what it felt like when watching this. Even though, of course, the first one came years before I was born, but still, the nostalgia still lives on there. Number 9, Split. Didn't know this was a sequel? Well, now you do. And, well, technically it's a sequel to another M. Night Shyamalan directed movie, Unbreakable. Even though that, of course, was more of a superhero-ish movie about a man who can, well, survive anything. He's the only survivor of a train crash, Bruce Willis's character to be exact. And, of course, you got Glass, played by Samuel L. Jackson in that movie. But this one, on the other hand, is more of a suspense horror film about a guy played by James McAvoy. You probably know as younger Charles Xavier from the X-Men movies, and he does a fantastic job with the whole multi-split personality disorder type of guy. So it definitely takes an interesting step in psychological issues that this guy has, and he reverts from one personality to another, and he's got multiple amounts of them. I mean, one minute he's like a kid, another minute he's a woman, another minute he's like a beast, and much, much more, and kidnaps and holds hostage 3 teenage girls in an unknown location that is soon revealed underground somewhere, and they have to escape him and deal with all the different personality changes and psychological problems that he has. It shows a lot of flashback from especially our main female heroine character, as well as his character with how he went to therapy and everything like that. His therapist comes in the picture and everything. So it's a real thinker movie, but it does have a lot of suspense. And as you know, M. Night Shyamalan has definitely had a real spotty history with directing. Obviously, he did great with The Sixth Sense, and I thought he did pretty good with Signs, and then he kind of went on a shit streak and made one bad movie after another, which got worse and worse. And then he came back, I thought, with The Visit, which I thought was a pretty decent film, but it wasn't until this one that most people can consider his big comeback film. And it was very well acted. It had a lot of great suspense, great performances. It didn't suck, for once. And of course, it's set up, if you saw at the end of this movie, it revealed that spoiler alert, it exists in the same universe as Unbreakable, and therefore that's why it's considered a sequel, and basically it's trying to go all Avengers. Yeah, it seems like the Avengers, at least to me, started this whole, multiple movies that exist in the same universe scenario. Yeah, a lot of movies series are really trying to do that. Some work out and others really don't. But this one, it worked out for this movie, and it got us all hyped up for the sequel, which is going to cross over with this character and the Unbreakable characters. And yeah, I definitely agree, it didn't quite work out as well as this film did, but that's up for anybody's opinion there. But otherwise, this is a great sequel. And if you didn't know it was a sequel, once again, now you know. Definitely go see it. It was, to most people, in my opinion, Shyamalan's biggest comeback. Number 8, A Quiet Place Part 2. Alright, well, you already know, and I ain't got much to say about this one. This is a great sequel. I already reviewed it. Great continuation. Most of the main characters are back. It starts out, first couple of minutes of the movie is a prologue, which explains how John Borowski's character is still alive, and then it goes on to being a sequel. So, yeah, it does a great job, great suspense, and I think even more entertaining than the first one, not to insult that one, and that's why I consider it a great sequel. It definitely takes the necessary step in developing more, bringing in new characters, like of course Cillian Murphy's character, who you probably know from most Christopher Nolan films, including of course the Dark Knight trilogy as a Scarecrow. He plays a big role in this film, and yeah, it's just very entertaining. Has a lot more spoken dialogue than the first one, which is a great thing, being that if you hated reading subtitles and you hated mostly silent parts, so you can be a little relieved on that one. Otherwise, it actually, just like the first film, kind of leaves off on a bit of a cliffhanger, as if it's trying to hint another one, which I have heard is probably coming out, but otherwise very entertaining for an hour and a half run. It's definitely suspenseful and does just as good, if not even better than the first. Number 7, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors. Yeah, I enjoyed the hell out of the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and the second one, which wasn't as good, it kind of brought the bar down a little bit. I mean, despite Robert Englund coming back, but the new characters didn't quite appeal to me as much. I mean, Robert Englund, we can all agree, is the best Freddy Krueger. Definitely better than that new one. I mean, the design to him was just so much better, and he has the perfect blend of horror as well as humor, and that's what they bring into this movie. That's why I consider it probably one of the best ones, better than the second. So yeah, I guess you could say third time's a charm on this one, because there's lots more kills, lots of humor, and the creativity and character development behind Freddy is great. Hell, even got Lawrence Fishburne making an appearance in this as one of the doctors. So yeah, if you were disappointed with the second one, give this one a look. There's lots of great stuff in here, and has the perfect blend of horror and campiness that you can't go wrong with right there. So, like I said before, third time is a charm, I guess, for this series. Number 6, Evil Dead 2. Obviously a sequel to the original, which I did enjoy, considering it was, number 1, an independent movie, and number 2, a very low-budget independent movie, I should say. And yes, I sort of enjoyed the remake from 2013, despite the fact that it was overhyped as one of the scariest movies ever made. I mean, that was just an overstatement right there. But the sequel, on the other hand, it ups the bar a bit with the amount of gore, horror, humor, and everything. I mean, the character comes back, played by Bruce Campbell, and he's just as badass and awesome as ever. I mean, Christ. He severs his own hand off, and then he replaces it with a chainsaw. How could you go wrong there? I mean, you could tell how much fun he was having on the set of this movie. I mean, anything could happen. And of course it sets up for another sequel, which some may agree is good, to some consent, but I don't think it's as good. It definitely goes in a different direction, but I think the stop-motion effects in this do make it look a little aged, but I think it's the perfect blend of campiness, horror, and enjoyment, which makes for a great sequel. So, definitely check it out if you're into these kind of horror films. I sure enjoyed it for what it was, and for the 1980s, you can't go wrong here. Number 5, Dawn of the Dead. Yes. Night of the Living Dead, the original, directed by George A. Romero, may he rest in peace, is a masterpiece. I mean, yes, there's been remakes of it, which one was decent, and the others were crap. So I think we can all agree they're nowhere near as good as his legacy. And he was very hesitant on making a sequel. I mean, how could he make a sequel as good as the original? I mean, I know it was limited on special effects, but for the time, it was fantastic. And it was gory, it was suspenseful. I mean, this defined the whole zombie movie genre as we know it, and it just exploded into a huge phenomenon of zombie films that are still going on even to today. So, George A. Romero decided to take the gamble and make a sequel, and believe it or not, it actually worked out. I mean, if it made this spot on the list, well, it certainly did. It upped the scale a bit, and it made it just as good, if not on some notes even better. It had more zombies, more suspense, more action. I mean, it took the necessary steps that made it work. It was great. The performances were great. So, yeah, that shows you right there, sometimes some directors can actually continue the franchise and make a worthy sequel. And of course, Zack Snyder made a remake of this movie in 2004, which I did think was good, but you can't top the original. There's just no way in hell. I mean, that's like saying Peter Jackson's King Kong is as good as 1933's. They're different in their own senses, it's more of a recreation of it, but still, George A. Romero, you may rest in peace knowing that you made some of the greatest zombie movies of all time. You may be gone, but your legacy still lives on. And this is one of the best sequels in the zombie genre. Number 4, Aliens. Yes, as we know, Ridley Scott directed a masterpiece from a seemingly generic title called Alien. I mean, nobody knew that this was going to be such a huge hit. It was a slow-paced, but rather building up suspense kind of movie, and it was a masterpiece. Anybody can agree. Released in 1979, you couldn't go wrong with this one. And it pretty much started the whole badass female character, because that's what Sigourney Weaver's character was. She was the sole survivor, spoiler alert, but I think all of you have seen that movie already, and it was gruesome, and it was awesome. I mean, with the alien bursting out of the guy's chest and growing at an excessive rate really fast, I mean, it was terrifying beyond belief. This was one of the greatest designs for aliens ever. And then, almost 10 years later, in 1986, James Cameron decided to take a gamble and release a sequel. And it's not very easy making a sequel to something that grand. But damn, he just upped the scale a lot. I mean, in some cases, you may argue that this is better than the first one. I think it is because, number 1, it's got great suspense, number 2, lots of action, and number 3, great characters as well. I mean, Sigourney Weaver returns hesitantly, going back into space on that planet after her experience, and who can blame her? I mean, that whole thing was just horrifying, and who would want to revisit that? But since they're re-terrestriating that planet, making it like Earth, shit goes wrong, and she decides, yep, she has to warn people about what's about to go down. And of course, the title is Aliens, pluralizing it, which was a smart move considering there are more than one aliens, including that big-ass queen alien. I mean, the design to this was fantastic, and the characters are great too. Under James Cameron's direction, he does a fantastic job with this. And it's nothing out of the ordinary for him that he directs movies with badass female characters. I mean, you've seen plenty of them, believe me, and Sigourney Weaver does not shy away from it in this film. I mean, there's plenty of great suspense. Even the child who she comes across is really interesting. I mean, they both open up to one another so much. You know, after her experience of what happened to her family, I mean, who can blame her? I mean, she's terrified on this planet. And I especially love Bill Paxton's character. I mean, he's annoying but hilarious at the same time. May he also rest in peace, unfortunately. And he's also been a frequent collaborator with James Cameron, as well as Sigourney Weaver. So, not much to say there. A great sequel, a little bit longer than the first, and if you can complain about the first one being too slow, not to worry, this one has a lot more fast-paced action, suspense, horror. I mean, it's just all over the place, but it's just fantastic. James Cameron did a fantastic job, and, well, sadly, that's where all the greatness ends after this one, because Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection, forget about it. It just didn't do as good. But what do you expect when you got a lot of directing and unwritten script issues? But this one is my favorite out of the whole franchise and will always be. Number 3, The Conjuring 2. Okay, well, you already know what I think of this one. I don't have to say much. James Wan is a fantastic horror film director. I mean, the Insidious movies, the first 2 to be exact, and of course the first Conjuring movie, which was a huge surprise hit. based off of the cases of the real-life demonologists who are sadly deceased now, Ed and Lorraine Warren, which sets the bar on how to make an old-school style horror film the right way, earning its R rating correctly without having to rely on gore and teens having sex and all that kind of stuff in horror films that you see nowadays. This is classic horror done right, earning its R rating correctly. And with James Wan returning as a director for this one, basing it on another case over in London, England, man, he does not disappoint at all.